So today we're going to be analyzing the short horror film Portrait of God by Dylan Clark, and we're going to be using the Pisser theory, PSRR, to analyze it. Basically, if you don't know what the Pisser theory is, go watch my last video. I explain it in depth, but shorthand, it's perspective, symbolism, repetition, and rationality. So we're going to use those four subjects to analyze the film and have a deeper understanding. So let's go ahead and get into it. So first we want to ask ourselves perspective, but before we do that, there's going to be a quote that pops up on screen. Here it is: "No man shall see me and live," Exodus 33:20. I want to talk a little bit about that for just a second here. So essentially, this is God talking to Moses saying, nobody on earth is worthy of seeing me and living because they're all so sinful. Now, this isn't meant to be taken literally. We can go back all the way to Genesis, and we know that for a deeper understanding of what God deems life and death to be, God tells Adam that if he partakes of the fruit, that Adam is going to die. And then later, when Eve is over by the tree, and the serpent's like, eat the fruit. And Eve's like, no, I'll die. God said that Adam and I would die if we ate the fruit. And the serpent's like, no, you won't die. You'll just know the difference between good and evil. So we know, based on the story of Adam and Eve, that the serpent was telling the truth, that they really do just understand the difference between good and evil after they eat the fruit. And so some people say that, it's a metaphorical standpoint from God, saying that their death is really their death of innocence, their death of purity. Or, some people just flat out call God a liar. But just be aware that this quote does heavily pertain to the movie, obviously, or else it wouldn't be in here, and that it is talking about life and death in the metaphorical sense, and we'll find out why by the end of it. So perspective. Who are we seeing the events of the short film through? We're about to get introduced to our main character. Here she is, Mia Riley. She is a young Christian woman. This is very important to the trajectory of the film. Now, she is preparing for this presentation, and so she's going to run through it a couple of times here. We're going to talk about the importance of why she does it a couple of times. But
what does God look like?
First of all, I just want to point out, as the camera pans to a more straight-on shot of her, pay attention to her right-hand side, our left-hand side. There will be kind of a blank space on the screen, a dark corner of the screen. Pay attention to that corner of the screen. And yeah, let's keep going.
I'm going to show you a painting, or rather, a photograph of a painting.
Notice how she's talking here. Notice that she is very cut and dry, that she doesn't really have much emotion to her voice, and that's very, very important. We'll talk about it a little bit later.
Just take a moment and stare at it. What do you see?
This is the first time we are introduced to the idea
the answer is
of
nothing,
the movie.
If it just looks black to you, don't worry, that's what I see too.
I'll let Mia
but
talk about it.
That's not what everyone sees. The painting I've chosen for this project is titled Portrait of God. While most...
Alright, so this little section over here, is that me or her eyes like kind of creepy right there? But yeah, this little section over here on the our left-hand side of the screen, this dark portion, you can see there's nothing there, it's just dark. Keep that in mind.
Viewers see nothing. Some insist they see a person in the darkness, one that they can describe and draw out with consistent details.
Here she's going to play some voice recordings. Pay attention to the breaking of repetition in themes. So we have our P, right? We have our perspective. Symbolism, S. I don't know if it's shown it yet, but it's about to, and it's the cross hanging around her neck. But not just the cross, because that is very in-your-face religious symbolism, but it's how often it's the repetition of her grabbing it, which it bridges the gap between symbolism and repetition, because the symbolism of her repeatedly grabbing the cross is her going back to the comfort of her already known ideologies of what religion and God is. And so every time she goes back to that, she is physically showing us her retreating back to this comfortable area, an area where her views on religion and God aren't being challenged.
Or close to a man. Wrinkled, skinny. Really skinny.
So the voice recordings here, they're going to be talking about how the image that they see is rather grotesque, unsettling. One of them says something along the lines of, yeah, it's frightening, that kind of power should be. This is all coming from the perspective of God-fearing people, which is something you hear a lot in the Christian religion, God-fearing. And there's one voice in these recordings that basically says, I don't want to look at it. I don't like looking at it. And in my opinion, that's breaking of repetition, because the other ones, while they're also a little put off by the portrait, they are admiring it. And there's only that one voice that really seems to be truly deeply unsettled and just doesn't want to look at it anymore.
He's smiling.
He's grinning. He smiles down at us.
Almost looks like the corners of his mouth got smudged.
Well, he's wearing a mask.
It's too wide. His eyes.
Alright, so here we see Mia grasping the cross around her neck. She will continually do that throughout the film.
Honestly, it's unsettling. Of course.
Alright, I'm going to pause it right here. Remember that blank space I told you to keep your eyes on? Look over here now. There are 2 dots. It is rather subtle. But this is symbolism of the creature, the portrait of the creature that is in the portrait, God, is starting to enter her subconscious. And we can see that by the subtlety of the appearance of God behind her, and we'll see him again in a minute when she is going back through the slides to restart her presentation. But yeah, so those are his eyes right there. Rather unsettling, really effective too.
I don't like it.
It's beautiful.
Maybe it's just a trick of the light. Maybe they're seeing something they want to see. But how are their descriptions so consistent? Maybe they really are having a religious experience. And why does God appear to them and not us?
Alright, I want to highlight that little line of dialogue right there. You can hear the disdain, the jealousy in her voice that these people are having this religious experience and she's not. And so we're about to see her ask a question in the next time she gives the presentation that really opens her up to this experience. And this is why repetition is so important, because we have the presentation already presented to us, right? She just went through the entire thing and she's going to go through it again. Why would she do that again? The answer is there's something different the second time she does it. And we're going to see that in just a second here. Pay attention as she's scrolling back through the slides. You'll see the creature real fast, really shortly. Minute and 46 seconds it said it took her to do that presentation. So ask yourself, what is different?
What does God look like?
What is different this time in this presentation?
I'm going to show you a painting, or rather, a photograph of a painting. Just take a moment and stare at it.
Hand to the cross.
What do you see?
There. She asks, what do you see? But she's not talking to a generalized audience this time like she was in the first presentation. She's talking to herself, which is super, super important. She's finally breaking off from that script and opening herself up to a challenge, really. It's challenging her ideas. She's going deeper into her premeditated thoughts of what religion is, and therefore we see God slowly revealed to her on the screen. She sees his eyes. Slowly he starts to come out of the shadows of the projector screen, and you can kind of see this amazement on her face. She is astounded, encapsulated with this infatuated even with this portrait of God. But then we start to see some fear settle in once she realizes that it's not what she was expecting, really. It matches everybody's descriptions perfectly, but this is not what she imagined God looks like. So, obviously very scary. She tries to get rid of the monster by reeling up the projector screen, and lo and behold, once you see God, you cannot unsee him. No man shall see me and live. Therefore, that she has metaphorically died, or her idea of God has metaphorically died. Alright, now we're in this kind of subconscious space. We can at least infer that because, she's in this black void with only one light on her. And this is where you get another really interesting example of symbolism. So we see the creature's eyes coming closer to her from the distance, very unsettling, viscerally haunting, for sure. That's one thing I love about this short film, is that it doesn't rely on cheap jump scares. It actually uses viscerally haunting imagery and sequences to unsettle you deeply. Alright, this is one of the most important examples of symbolism, also the repetition thing, but she goes and grabs the cross, but this time she's physically turning her body away from God to pray to God. It doesn't really make any sense because, well, to her it does, to us not really. We know that this creature here is God, or we can infer that this creature is God. But she doesn't want to believe it. Therefore, she turns away and prays to an idea of God, which is very important.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
As soon as her prayer ends, you'll never guess what happens. His hand comes out of the darkness and turns her towards him. And then here we get, again, very religious symbolism. He pulls down his mouth, and out of his mouth comes the word of God, the light of God, right? That's very obviously portrayed here. And then we see another form of symbolism, and that's the light of God in somebody's eyes. That's something you'll hear Christians say all the time, is they have the light of God in their eyes. And so we're seeing that represented in Mia's eyes. Here, she's very clearly, deeply infatuated with what she just saw. This is my favorite bit of symbolism here, and that is her grabbing the cross, but it making her physically bleed. That's so important because it just shows that now that she knows what God is, what he looks like, what the truth of him is, if she continues to go back to this preconceived idea of God, the false idea of God, it'll do nothing but hurt, cause her pain. So she basically is forced in this situation to accept the truth. And we can see here that she's been here for about 3 hours, as compared to her original minute 46-second presentation. So obviously she's having an existential experience right now, staring at this portrait. And we can see her smile at the end there, and then the movie ends. So the only letter we didn't talk about yet is rationality. So we have perspective. Mia Riley, young religious woman, symbolism, the hand on the cross all the time. There's a few others in there, right? The bleeding hand, the her turning away from God to pray to him. So a lot of symbolism in there. We have repetition. The hand to the cross bridges that gap. The repeating of the presentation and the repeating themes in the voice lines and the breaking of that repetition, which is the most important part. So what is the rationality, the last R of the Pisser theory? The rationality is very simple, and this is why rationality comes last, is because it's the easiest conclusion to come to after you use the other three tools to help you analyze the film. The rationality is the horror of our ideas being challenged. And so, obviously, it's a religious setting here. Her idea of God has been deeply challenged, but with the truth of the portrait that she doesn't want to accept, and that is terrifying. And to many of us, our ideas that we were raised on, political beliefs, religious beliefs, whatever it may be, once those are challenged and presented with factual evidence in front of us, it can be a scary experience, knowing that you may have been living with ideas based on lies. So that's kind of the rationality I boil it down to. There was another one that I kind of got in there, and that's the thing is, in the last video we talked about how there can be more than one interpretation of a film, right? And so another one I got in there was a commentary on the grooming of children in the Christian religion, telling the children that even if you don't believe quite yet in God, that you just keep praying to God and eventually he'll reveal himself to you. And you just keep bearing your testimony, and eventually you'll actually have one that matters to you. And this is a tactic used often to kind of get kids to believe in something that's not really there, and it's very easy for a kid to grow up and wrap their brain around that as it's still developing. And so it's like a tactic of grooming, really, that you see often in organized religion. And so I kind of felt some of that in there, with her repeating her presentation, and then eventually she actually had her experience with God. But I don't think that's the strongest interpretation. I think the strongest one is obviously her ideas being challenged. So yeah, that's gonna about do it. That is the pisser theory being applied to a short film. It can be applied to a feature-length film as well. So definitely go out and try it on your own. I think you'll be really impressed with the results and your new understanding of certain movies and films. And I did develop this for horror specifically. It may or may not work with other films, maybe psychological thrillers or whatever it may be. You may be able to use this theory, but yeah, that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. If you made it to this point of the film, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps me out a lot. I'm at 43 subscribers, and I'm looking to get to 50 here soon. So if you could help me reach that goal, it would be much appreciated. Thank you so much again, and we will catch you in the next one.